All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Wild Science webinar. This is our second iteration of the Wild Science webinar. The first one was last month. This will be a new webinar series, typically held the first Monday morning of every month, probably in this same time slot around 10:30. We'll let you know if there are any changes. But just wanted to welcome everybody to this series, and a reminder that this will be recorded, unlike the first one, and shared with the public through the Game and Fish YouTube channel. There will be time for questions at the end of each presenter's time slot, and you can obviously unmute then to ask questions. You can also post questions in the comment section, and I'll read those to the presenters as well. But first up, we want to welcome Allison Fowler and Jeff Quinn, who will be today's presenters. Allison will be talking about monarch conservation in Arkansas, and Jeff will be talking about the Leopard Darter. Allison's going to start things off for us today. Allison Fowler is the Wildlife Diversity Program Coordinator for the Game and Fish Commission. She served in that position for over 9 years, coordinating efforts for species of greatest conservation need and overseeing the implementation of the Arkansas Wildlife Action Plan. Before joining Game and Fish, Allison worked as a field ecologist for the Arkansas Field Office of the Nature Conservancy. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Wildlife Ecology and Management from Arkansas State University and a Master's of Science in Forest Resources from the University of Arkansas at Monticello. Allison, take it away.
All right, I'm going to share this. Thanks, Trey. And if you'll let me know when I'm up and running.
We got it, Allison.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here to talk about monarchs with you. You've probably at least heard of a monarch, and most of you have probably seen a monarch butterfly. It's a larger butterfly. It's got these bold orange and black colors. If you haven't seen one, you should be seeing more of them, hopefully around town. Monarchs have this coveted spot on the AGFC conservation license plate this year. Pretty exciting. Monarchs are typical to most other butterflies in a few ways. They have their typical life cycle. Females lay eggs. Eggs hatch into caterpillars. In monarchs, the caterpillars go through about 5 different growth stages. We call those instars. The large instar, the 5th instar, forms the chrysalis from which the adult monarch emerges. And that whole process from egg to adult takes about a month. Also, like other butterflies, monarchs have a preferred host plant. In their case, that is milkweed. In Arkansas, we have 20 species of milkweed, so we have several to choose from for laying eggs on. They come in a variety of heights and colors. They're actually really a pretty flowering plant. And not only are they a good host plant for monarchs, but they're also a really good nectar plant for all pollinators. We start seeing monarchs in Arkansas about late March to early April. And that is the thing that really sets monarchs apart, is this massive migration that they undertake. In the U.S., we have 2 different populations, essentially. We have those west of the Rockies, that's our west population, and those monarchs overwinter on the coast of California. In Arkansas, we have the eastern population, and that population overwinters predominantly in the central part of Mexico, but also a little subpopulation in southern Florida and up along the coast of South Carolina and Georgia. So monarchs will spend most of their time in the winter in this small area in central Mexico, and as spring starts, they'll start migrating north, eventually making it all the way up to the northern part of the U.S. and even the southern part of Canada. When we think about this, we often talk about this as far as generations. So the monarchs that come from Mexico in the spring are known as the first generation that moves north looking for milkweed. As soon as they find a good patch, they're going to be laying eggs. They're going to lay their eggs and die. their offspring are the second generation. That generation moves forth, and that continues until they pretty much reach the northern part of the US and southern Canada. These butterflies live for only about a month, just long enough to reproduce, essentially. This last generation is the one that flies a couple thousand miles back down to Mexico. So these butterflies that weigh about the same as a paperclip are flying several thousand miles to a place they've never been before, and that's what makes it really, really amazing. You can imagine when you're covering that much ground, you're going to run into some trouble. Monarchs are threatened in Mexico on the overwintering grounds by logging. They only occur in about 11 to 12 sites. They have a pretty specific microclimate that they like in the oil mill fir forests there. And those are threatened with logging, both illegal and legal logging, and some of those forests into crops. They've also been seeing wetter winters there due to climate change. Those wetter winters make it more likely for monarchs to freeze and die. The breeding and migrating monarchs, the biggest threat to those is habitat conversion, habitat loss. A lot of our native prairies are gone. They've been converted to other things. Farmers have gotten really good and efficient. There's no longer the milkweed mixed in the fields that there once was, particularly in the Midwest. They've lost a lot of their milkweed stems in the Corn Belt region. And then, the increase in use of insecticides and herbicides is also thought to be affecting monarch and other insect populations. Scientists have been monitoring monarch populations since about the early 1990s, and they do that essentially by measuring the amount of area that the monarchs are covering at the overwintering sites. And you can see that about the early 2000s, that population started sort of taking a downward trend. And then when you get to the winter of 2012 or 2014, you had 3 pretty low years as far as population goes. That winter of 2013 was a huge red flag to conservationists, and it set a lot of things in motion. President Obama signed a presidential memorandum that year urging people to conserve monarchs and pollinators. And the Fish and Wildlife Service was petitioned to list the monarch under the Endangered Species Act at this time. So a lot of agencies were bringing on staff and budgeting more funds to deal with this monarch conservation issue. In Arkansas, this resulted in the formation of the Arkansas Monarch Conservation Partnership, which is a group of state, federal, nonprofit, and private citizens coming together to work to conserve monarch and pollinators. We realized quickly that this wasn't just a one agency problem. Monarchs really need all people coming together and doing their part. That group devised our statewide monarch and pollinator conservation plan for conserving monarchs and pollinators. It includes goals and objectives for restoring habitats, for research and monitoring, and for outreach and education. I'd love to talk more about that, but they only gave me 15 minutes. When we started putting the plan together, of course, the first thing we did was started pulling all the literature we could on monarchs in Arkansas. And I realized quickly there's just not a lot of it, especially when I went to look for monarch records, monarch observations. We're only about a couple hundred for all time, which is kind of surprising given that monarchs are not really a rare species. So this led me to want to collect more data. And I decided to do this in a community science type of way, using the Inaturalist platform. Inaturalist is a really, really awesome website. There's also an app for your phone, but essentially you can take a picture of any critter or any plant and submit it, and there are experts on there that will identify that for you. And once the experts have identified those things, they become known as a research grade observation, and then those observations can be pulled by different researchers and used in their projects. So it's really neat. It's a great way for the community to contribute to science. So we pushed this out in August of 2017. And we wanted to really just collect more data on distribution and hopefully on the timing of the migration in Arkansas. We asked folks to tell us when and where they saw a monarch, and if it was an adult, a caterpillar, or an egg. We also thought this might be a good way to identify hotspots or migration corridors. Another purpose this project serves is just to increase the public's awareness of monarch conservation and the plight that monarchs are in. It also helps AGFC engage a broader audience and hopefully increase our relevancy to user groups that we're not traditionally reaching. So we have 3.5 years of data now, and in that time we've had 226 people contribute observations. And the majority of those contributors have been from the public at large. We've had about 9% of those were from AGFC staff, and then 12% other biologists who work in other conservation agencies. We're at over 1,000 observations, and that includes over 2,700 observations of adults and 1,200 observations of caterpillars. A neat thing about Inaturalist, when you do a project, you're able to download your data. So I'm able to download location data and then pull it into a GIS, and then I can analyze it spatially. So you can see from our project, we got pretty good coverage statewide. We have observation records now for 60 out of 75 counties. And typical to a lot of community science projects, you can see you get these big clusters in our urban areas. It's not really uncharacteristic for these types of projects. But it kind of reiterates the fact, that we can really start reaching different audiences by doing these types of projects. You can also overlay the data on other layers. One thing I did was just take a look at which of our AGFC managed WMAs that we had a lot of observation monarchs on. And quickly you can kind of see areas that are going to be really good habitat. So those were Camp Robinson SUA, which has a lot of really good native prairie open woodlands, and Rick Evans Grandview Prairie, which is in southwest Arkansas. It's in a great location because it's close to that main migratory pathway. And Grandview is a really nice intact prairie. It's got a lot of acres. It's got a high forb diversity and probably the highest density of milkweed that I've seen anywhere in the state. And during fall and spring migrations, there's probably 200 to 400 monarchs at a time using that area. Another couple of neat things we found out from observations on our WMAs is that monarchs like to use our moist soil units. Those have smartweed in them, particularly in the fall, and monarchs seem to be really honing in on those. I had a couple of observations of, at least 100 monarchs on the moist soil units. I thought that was interesting. So our adults, again, they start arriving typically in March, usually later March, maybe the 1st of April. And then throughout the summer, they're around, but they're in much lower numbers. And then in the fall, we see sort of a first wave, late August, early September, and then our peak fall migration typically happens that first or second week of October. And these things are really timed with weather. You can see in the fall, especially when you get a good cold front from the north around the 1st of October, you can expect seeing more monarchs trickling through the state. And caterpillars, I was really surprised at the amount of data we were able to get on caterpillars. Again, this is really tied to when the adults are here. You see a peak in the spring, which is expected as that first generation of monarchs is coming into Arkansas looking to lay eggs. And then like the adults, we have them around in the summer, just not in very big numbers. And then in the fall, we get another wave of breeding, which was really surprising. This wasn't really something we expected to see. We thought there would be some, but it really looks like there's a huge peak here around early to mid-September. So this leads us back to rethinking this generational map. The fourth generation really looks like some of those butterflies are coming and breeding, and then their offspring is actually a fifth generation, which migrates to Mexico. So this is something that had been talked about in some of the other states, but now we actually have some observation data to really support this notion of a fifth generation. And I mentioned before that the Fish and Wildlife Service was petitioned to list the monarch under the Endangered Species Act. They did their review and released their finding back in December, and they did find that the monarch should be listed. However, they have other species on their plates that they consider higher priorities. So that means that the monarch is currently a candidate species for listing. And the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to reevaluate their status in 2024. So the next 3 years, is a really good time for us to sort of double down on our efforts for monarchs if we want to make a change in their status and hopefully preclude the need to list them. For AGFC, this means restoring and maintaining our open habitats, our prairies and open woodlands and savannas. And it's something that we're really already doing. We have a big quail emphasis right now. We're doing a great job, getting those habitats where they need to be. One thing we can think about is timing our management, prescribed fire and chemical application to try to minimize impacts where we can to monarch populations. And the recommended window is from about November 1st through March the 1st. One more thing for us to think about is mowing. Are we mowing too much? Are there areas that we mow that we don't need to mow? Something to think about. I've definitely seen some times that we've mowed, then maybe we could do that at a different time of year. What can folks do at home? The best thing is to try to provide some habitat. You can plant a native garden and include native milkweed specifically for monarchs. And we just finished a native gardening brochure for folks, which includes a recommended plant list. And most of the plants in the brochure you should be able to find at some of our local nurseries that sell native plants. If you can't plant a native garden, maybe you can mow less often. There are research studies that show if you mow every 2 weeks as opposed to every 1 week, you'll have increased bee diversity and abundance in your yard. And if you need to use any pesticides, just use them sparingly and thoughtfully to help reduce any impacts to insects. There are native seed collection events that are going on around the state, particularly in the fall. This helps us collect native seed for restoration projects. So you can definitely volunteer at those if you're interested in getting out and getting your boots dirty. And of course, you can keep participating in community science and helping us gather information. And if anyone ever has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. We also have a statewide monarch and pollinator coordinator. Her name is Leslie Cooper. She works for Quail Forever. She's awesome. You can also reach out to Leslie. And that's all I had, Trey.
All right. Thank you, Allison. How about questions? Who's got questions about monarchs in Arkansas for Allison? I had a question, but you answered it because when you were talking about finding eggs, and I know I've been down to Grandview Prairie with you with some citizen scientists tagging monarchs. We found some eggs on milkweed there. So my question was, well, then that's not a fourth generation. I mean, what happens to that fifth generation? But you did answer that and said they're maybe pointing to a fifth generation that's making that abbreviated or a shorter trip to Mexico, at least.
Still a long trip.
No doubt. Who's got questions? Anybody got a question they want to throw out?
Yeah, Trey, I've got a question for Allison. This is Ken Foreman from the Fred Berry Conservation Education Center. First of all, Allison, thank you for doing this. This is really great, good information. That fifth generation that Trey mentioned that you talked about, are we certain that that's the fifth generation, or is there a chance that the fourth generation is actually what we're seeing happening? So maybe the third generation is coming back and then on the way back. How do we know that we're up to 5 generations, in other words?
There are some studies with stable isotope analysis that are telling us where monarchs are coming from. We haven't done that in Arkansas to see in the fall, where those are coming from, but they've certainly done a lot of research on that in the overwintering monarchs in Mexico. So they know essentially where they're coming from. I don't know that we can say for sure which generation we're seeing that's breeding in the fall.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ken. Anybody else?
Hey, Allison, Strowman here. I'll go ahead and blurt it out. I tried to raise my hand here in Google, but I don't guess we're acknowledging hands. Anyway, well, great presentation. First question I had for you was, were there any areas that weren't WMAs that have done prairie restoration? You saw lots of monarchs clustering around. Obviously, like, some of our properties, we've done prairie restoration. I'm familiar with those. So were there any like NGO examples or like heritage properties that also saw large conglomerations of monarchs?
There were a lot of areas. There were actually some of the areas that we have regulations, but we don't manage the habitat. Like some core properties actually kind of popped up, and I think that was because we actually have someone in our partnership who was probably submitting those observations. I don't think of any off the top of my head. Obviously, Cherokee and Flanagan prairies had a lot of observations too, because they're one of the few remaining tallgrass prairies up in the northwest part of the state. I haven't delved into the data as much as I would like, but that's something that I'm planning to look at.
Well, I'll follow it up with a real easy softball for you then.
Okay.
What kind of maintenance am I looking at if I want to plant some milkweeds in my backyard? I'm kind of a brown thumb and I don't really want to do a lot of active stuff. Is it hard to grow them?
I've had really good success with just collecting some seeds in the fall when the pods kind of first open, grabbing the seeds and finding where I want to put them and just kind of lightly putting them in the soil. That way they overwinter because they have to have that cold stratification to germinate. So I've just done that, just broadcast them there, cover them up just a little bit, and wait for the spring, wait for them to show up. Some people like to plant the plugs. So if you'd rather do that, you can. Milkweed's pretty popular, so good luck finding some.
Right.
All right, thanks, Justin. Just a housekeeping note: with 75 people on the call, it's pretty hard to see an individual raise a hand. I'm only got 16 panels that I can see, so just blurting out is probably the best way to handle this moving forward. Or type your question in the comments section. All right, who else has got questions for Allison?
It's Kelly Irwin, and I was wanting to know, if Allison, if any of the gas line or power line transmission companies have thought about making prairie strips along their right-of-ways.
Good question, Kelly. We actually have a whole section in our conservation plan for rights of way. And Enable Windstream is one of our partners in the partnership. And they're actually doing some really awesome integrated vegetation management where they're going, and instead of, a lot of times on power lines, you'll see this go through and they broadcast herbicide everything. But they're actually doing this so that they're hiring crews and they're spot treating the woody growth to keep them open. And they're seeing some really good results. So they're getting those native plants in those power lines. I don't know that they planted any. That's certainly a possibility for some of those. We're definitely encouraging all of those power companies to consider either the integrated vegetation management or, planting if it's needed. Yeah, but it's definitely on the radar.
Well, good. I know that gas lines don't have the same problem with transmission lines, and like there's a gas line in front of my house, so like that would be an excellent one to look at as well. Not just power lines, I guess. So hopefully those are planned too. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Anybody else got questions? All right. Going once, going twice. And going 3 times. All right. Well, let's thank you so much, Allison. That was a great presentation, a lot of wonderful information. And I know I've learned a few things. Hope others did as well. Our next presenter and final presenter for this month will be Jeff Quinn. If you don't know, Jeff has been the stream fisheries biologist for the Game and Fish since August of 1998. He works statewide on river and stream fisheries issues and is stationed in the Mayflower office. Jeff graduated in 1994 with a Bachelor of Science from Winona State University in Minnesota and earned his master's in zoology in 1998 from the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. Jeff co-authored the first editions of the Game and Fish walleye, paddlefish and sturgeon, and catfish management plans. And he's worked on a lot of smallmouth bass streams and Arkansas River fisheries issues. Jeff was the 2008 recipient of the Mike Freese Award for Excellence in Fisheries Biology, as voted by his peers in the Fisheries Division. He served as president of the Arkansas chapter of American Fisheries Society and is chair of the AFS Southern Division's Warm Water Streams Committee. Jeff's job has evolved in recent years, and he works quite a bit on projects and species, including eels, descriptions of undescribed fish species, stream temperature monitoring, and species status assessments related to endangered species petitions. Today, Jeff's going to be talking about leopard darters, and the title of his presentation is Houston, We've Had a Problem. Jeff Quinn, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Trey.
Looks like we've got you, Jeff.
Okay, and you can see.
Yep, there we go.
Okay,
Bingo.
thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging the project that I'm working on has multiple partners in different agencies, and this project's been worked on by multiple people within the division. So welcome and good morning, and thank you so much for coming. Looks like we have a really good crowd this morning. So darters are a group of fishes that a lot of people are unfamiliar with. Many people will never see one in their life, unlike a monarch. At least when I was a kid, I saw monarchs quite often, but most people don't see darters. They're a group of really colorful fish. They're kind of like the songbirds of streams, if you will. There's some that are bright green, and there's some that are blues and orange. So there's about 49 species in the state and several undescribed forms, and several of them are somewhat imperiled. The Endangered Species Act was passed by Congress in 1973. It was designed to protect species from extinction. In Arkansas, we have 38 listed species, including 6 species of fish. A public opinion survey suggests that 83% of Americans support the Endangered Species Act. And a 2006 responsive management survey of the general public of Arkansas suggested that 92% of Arkansans think endangered species management is important, and 78% say it's very important. So we feel like we have a public mandate for conservation of our endangered species. I want to introduce the leopard darter to you through a video. This is an excellent video taken by Maxwell Hartman, and it shows a leopard darter in the Cossata River. Let me reduce the volume. And this is over a habitat that's kind of a spring where there's groundwater upwelling. There are lots of rocks. It really likes rocky rubble substrate. It likes the cool water. And there's another leopard darter that comes in the screen before they're both chased off by another species, hog perch. So the leopard darter was listed as threatened in 1978 by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, has a limited range of 5 streams. 4 of the 5 streams are impacted by dams. And hopefully you can see my cursor, but in Arkansas, we have leopard darter in the Upper Mountain Fork, in the Robinson Fork or Robinson Creek, which is a tributary to the Rolling Fork above Queen Lake, and then in the Cossata River above Gillum Lake. But only a portion of the Cossata River has leopard darter. They've never been observed in the upstream reaches above the falls, so they're only in this limited reach. They're a small fish with a 3-inch maximum size. They live only 1 year, so they're subject to disturbance They spawn once per lifetime in riffles in March to April. Their food, they're insectivores, they're predaceous, and they eat predominant blackfly larvae. Those are the little bugs that kind of can bite you and sting your eyes and stuff. So they provide a valuable ecosystem service in controlling those. Their habitat are these flashy rivers that really go up and down a lot. And they live in the pools and rubble boulder substrate. They tend to prefer temperatures less than 29 degrees C, and this is relatively recent information. 29 C is about 84 Fahrenheit, which is about the temperature I think it becomes comfortable to swim in a swimming pool. When I started work with the Game and Fish Commission in 1998, Leopard Darter was described as being stable, their population status. Annual monitoring by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service was being done. And when we asked about helping, they said, your help is generally not needed. There was a paper published in 1999 that suggested there were large population sizes. Usually we're not too worried about a population if there's less than 1,000 species, 1,000 animals. But the like Cossatot River was supposed to have 1,600 to 3,000. That was the 95% confidence interval. So it was decent sized populations, we thought back then. Fast forward to 2012, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service published a 5-year review that said the species was currently stable to declining. This is a figure from that report. It's Robinson Fork data. And they said that no trend was detected, but what was interesting was the species was really already flatlined. There were a lot of zeros before 2005 and 98, 2000 and 2002. So it's highly variable data. It lacks statistical power, but this was actually a biologically significant trend. It started flatlining with all zero data starting in 2006. A similar interesting pattern was observed in the Cossatot River, where they said no trend was detected, but it was biologically significant that they were starting to see zeros pop up in the data set in 2005, 2009, and 2011. And these transects where they do snorkeling surveys is really optimal habitats. So when you start seeing zero data, you start becoming really concerned that the species is not doing too well. In 2015, I was working on the Arkansas Wildlife Action Plan revision, and when we finished it, we sent it out for comment to our interagency fish taxa team. And one of the comments I got back was from Rich Standage with the Forest Service, and he basically said, Houston, we've had a problem. And in Robinson Creek, leopard darter had not been detected then in 10 years. Genetic studies had been done at Oklahoma State University that suggested there were a low number of breeders or effective population size. And the effective population size or number of breeders in the Cossatot River was only 5 fish. It was acknowledged that the 1999 population estimates were probably wrong. Science is an iterative process, and at the time they didn't use temperature criteria in determining suitable habitat because those temperature criteria did not even exist. And so they overestimated the suitable habitat, and when they extrapolated their population estimates, they were much too large. And so at the time they said, we need your help, and this is really where I got engaged with leopard darter management. So there was a 2015 meeting the service held in Fort Smith where we decided our path forward. And for me, that was a lot of surveys from 2000 to 2019. We did surveys where there's an open circle on this map is where the leopard darter was present, and where there's a black dot is where they're absent. So in the Mountain Fork, there's a lot of open circles because we saw 112 fish at 18 sites. The species was doing okay there. In the upper Cossatot River above Gillum Lake, we saw them at 2 of 32 sites. We actually surveyed every single pool. We censused everyone that they could possibly be in above Gillum Lake. They don't occur above the falls. So that was really pretty good evidence that the species was just hanging on by a thread there. You know, is an imminent danger of extirpation without human intervention. On the lower Cossatot River, we did random stratified population surveys and found no leopard darters at 28 sites. And so the last time leopard darter were observed below Gillum Dam was in 1978. So it's pretty strong evidence that they're probably extirpated there too. And then the Robinson Creek, we found 0 at 17 sites. So this is evidence they're extirpated. And we also had eDNA studies that failed to detect the DNA of the leopard darter done by Dr. Brooke Fluker and Taylor Lee at Arkansas State University. So what are we dealing with? We're really dealing with a situation where the populations decline. We're dealing with the legacy effects of the dams that were built in the 70s. And extirpation was likely a 25 to 30-year process. And upstream of the dam, just small sections of stream were left that provided habitat, so probably were small populations. And downstream of the dam, there's really big changes in hydrology or water releases. I think of Gillum Dam as being kind of like a big bathtub with a small drain. And this slide actually shows the small drain. So where it used to be a real flashy river that went up and down a lot, you'd have floods that were 10, 50,000 CFS. Now this pipe releases floods in a constant 3,000 CFS flow. And the river doesn't really get down to the 500 to 1,000 during the time period where leopard darter would be rearing their young, where their young need shallow, slow water habitat. And that kind of habitat's virtually eliminated by this kind of a release from a dam. Robinson Creek has other issues. It has barriers in the form of 5 low water slabs that fragment the river. So when it gets too hot, a pool gets too hot, they can't necessarily migrate to the next pool because there might be a bridge or a low water crossing in the way that's impassable. Leopard darter really can't get through structures like this that concentrate flow that much. And they definitely can't get over something that would require them to jump 1 or 2 feet to get through it. So this is a big issue there. The Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality considers a stream impaired in the Ouachita ecoregion if 10% of the data exceeds 86 Fahrenheit or 30 degrees C, which is this red line on this chart of the Cossatot River temperatures. Cossatot River exceeded the standard 21% of 2018, including 66% of the summer. And the peak temperature was 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 C. And the conclusion is basically the stream is impaired thermally. Fish kills are possible. In fact, we did observe some. And these peaks in temperatures are probably occurring during periods of warm nights. And because of the hot temperatures we've been seeing, we've been monitoring temperatures throughout streams in the state using tidbit loggers that are installed in PVC solar shields. We do this wherever there's rare and imperial fish. One thing that's kind of interesting is NOAA has air temperature data from 1900 to present. And they said for 2010 to 2014, the number of very warm nights was double the long-term average. And what happens in these very warm nights is then the stream doesn't cool off at night, and it relates to warmer stream temperatures the following day. And you can see there were also really warm temperatures in the Dust Bowl era, but back then, these fish could survive in downstream areas. And now, during the current era, they really don't have those areas because they're all reservoir. So the reason for these declines is really we're dealing with the legacy effects of dams built in the 60s and 70s. The dams, again, create small upstream populations. Downstream, we have a lack of floods and lack of low water time periods during the rearing period. Our climate has been changing to one with more flash and then extreme precipitation events. And there were big droughts in this watershed in 2006 and 2011. And the 2011 one was also associated with record temperatures where Texas even broke the 1980 drought record for the number of days over 100 degrees. These flash droughts are associated with algae blooms often, like the one you see pictured in this slide. I actually go surveying for leopard darter and I have to swim through these algal mats like this. Sometimes you come up just covered with algae. Another issue is these extreme precipitation events makes the entire Cossatot River habitat above Gillum Lake become part of Gillum Lake. The The whole habitat up there is actually in the flood pool of Gillum Lake. Gillum Lake used to rarely get into the flood pool, but in recent years, it's getting into the flood pool much more frequently. And as I previously alluded to, the very warm nights is an issue because it relates to really hot stream temperatures that are capable of killing fish. So we have several conservation programs ongoing. Some of these programs are not optimal. The real thing causing the decline is the legacy of the dam. So some of these are somewhat band-aid approaches, but they're best we can do. They're kind of the cards that have been laid in front of us. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is contracted with conservation fisheries out of Tennessee to try to propagate leopard darter so we could stock them back into the Robinson Fork. Conservation Fisheries is the global leader in conservation of non-game fish. The service has tried to do this twice before, but has failed. And so we're going to contract out to an outside expert group, and I think they'll probably be able to do it. The Mountain Fork, we have fish there that will probably translocate to the Cossatot River because the copper population is expected to be extirpated without human intervention. And this is part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service genetic rescue plan. We'd like to improve fish passage at the Robinson Fork, but it's expensive. It can be $600,000 to $1 million to replace one of these slabs. And we have a budget of about $100,000 for all endangered species issues. So it's way too expensive. We have to get other partners to help. And then we entered into a partnership with the Corps and the TNC for a Sustainable Rivers program for Gillum Dam, where the Corps studies how to release water from the dam to improve habitat for not only leopard darter, but also the endangered mussels. But the issue in this situation is really the Corps has limited flexibility because the size of the pipe that goes to the dam is pretty small, and they don't have other waste water. But we would like to see the number of days of flooding above of Gillum Lake into the leopard darter habitat. We'd like to see those number of days reduced, and we'd like to see flashier floods downstream, but this is generally not possible because of the size of the pipe and also developments like houses and bridges downstream. So the Corps is pretty confined in what they can do based on the construction histories of the 60s to 80s. So I'd like to end on a little bit of a high note, which is another cool video. I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. And this is from the Mountain Fork. It's over a spring that's really cold. It's really uncomfortable to dive there. It's so cold. And Maxwell took these videos again. And I'd like to end with my take-home messages. We're still dealing with legacy effects of dams on endangered fish populations. And oftentimes there's no real easy solutions. We do the best that we can. And leopard darter situation where climate was associated with declines. We've seen these hot nights relate to high stream temperatures and algae blooms. And when algae blooms, we can have dissolved oxygen get very low, and that can really it can kill fish in a hurry. So, and this problem is not only happening in the Cossatot River, but it's also occurred on the Buffalo River where we've had big algae blooms. So we're really wanting to improve our monitoring of temperature and algae situations.
Thank you, Jeff. Open it up to questions now, and while you may be considering one, I'll throw one out. Jeff, what is it? What specifically about the habitat in Mountain Fork makes it have a more robust population? Even those admittedly probably wrong estimates from the late 90s, but that seems to be more of a hot spot for leopard darters. What habitat characteristics make it produce more?
That's a great question. We believe the Mountain Fork probably has a really good population still because it still has a lot of groundwater input of water. It has a lot of springs, so the temperature of the stream remains cooler overall, and they just really orient around groundwater input. And for streams in the Ouachitas, we generally don't know where groundwater is coming in. The aquifers, groundwater interactions are not well known. And the interesting thing about this to me is that Mountain Fork's actually listed as impaired for temperature by ADQ, but it's actually the stream that runs the coolest for most of its reach, we think. So we're going to have to do some more temperature monitoring to really show that. And it takes a few years. We do have some problems where if we put a temperature logger in a stream, sometimes it just gets blown out by big floods in recent years. So it's harder and harder to keep them in the stream. And we're having to use a little bit different approaches to make sure they don't go anywhere.
All right, who's got another question for Jeff?
Thanks, Kelly Irwin. Again, Jeff, do you have any plans on the books to take out those low water crossings?
Thanks for the question, Kelly. Yeah, we'd like to take out the crossings, but they're cost prohibitive right now. We'd have to write grants and get other partners involved. Much of them are on Weyerhaeuser property, who has been a great conservation partners. They've allowed us land access, and so, but the counties aren't really interested in paying for additional, replacement of these bridges for Leopard Darter because, nobody really lives there. It's basically timberlands. So, trying to find private donors is going to be probably something we have to do to get this going. Like have a group like TNC help step up and help fund something and have the service really step up. Road, improperly designed road crossings are a huge issue for our non-game fish throughout the state. But this is a place where it's an extra big problem. So,
thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Who's next? Before we close things down, Jeff, I know, or somebody did I hear somebody asking a question? Okay, maybe not. I've been talking with Daryl Bowman and Fisheries quite a bit about the Arkansas Stream Heritage Partnership. Could there possibly be some opportunities there to work under that umbrella to maybe get some of these barriers replaced or altered in some way?
Yeah, those are the exact kind of that's the exact kind of a partnership we'd have to utilize to be able to do a project like that. And of course, the service would have to be heavily involved too, we think. They actually have construction crews that can come help us at greatly reduced cost. And really reducing cost has to be a big part of the equation too. And when you have so many of them to do, especially, it's going to be part of the equation. And these streams are so flashy though, that, they really can take out bridge crossings really quick. There's a lot of power in those streams when they flood. At some point in time, they'll have to be replaced. And one of the key things is, making sure when they are replaced that they're replaced with something that's fish passage friendly too.
All right, Jeff, I'm going to use my bully pulpit as moderator to ask one more question. And if somebody wants to cut me off, they can. But one of the things that struck me is you talked about 10% of the time having temperatures above whatever that threshold was. How was that decided? What makes an impaired stream? What algorithm goes into that determination, if you will?
Okay, well, that's the determination of whether a stream is impaired or not based on temperature is made by the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality. And it's based upon, their examination of stream temperatures throughout the region, the Washtenaws. It's done by ecoregion. And they have ecoregional reference streams, which are minimally impacted streams that they have temperature profiles from. So they can compare all the streams and kind of really know what to expect and what not to expect. And then they also know the streams that are impaired, they'll do fish population sampling, and they actually can see how temperature can relate to the impairment of fish and macroinvertebrates in a stream. So they collect an awful lot of data to really to determine that, and it's usually those kind of determinations. Also, their rules are approved by the EPA.
All right, somebody else ask a question before I go off into a smallmouth bass water temperature rabbit hole with Jeff, which should probably be saved for a private conversation. Anybody else got a question? I see somebody on a call in with their mute off. You got a question? I don't see a name. All right, maybe not. Okay, going once, going twice, going 3 times. Jeff Quinn, Allison Fowler, and all of our colleagues that joined to listen and learn. Thank you very much. It's been fun, and we'll see you next month.